So, good morning. My name is Rob Weill. I work at the American Federation of Teachers. I am the Director of Research, Policy, and Field Services for Educational Issues. That's our fancy way of saying I work a lot with K-12 and not necessarily higher. But the reason I'm here is because I do a lot of work in AI. I started working on AI years ago. I sent a memo to President Weingarten on the impact of artificial intelligence on education back in 2017, telling her that it's a coming and we better be on top of it. And she said, "What is it?" And I've never heard of it, but pay attention to it. And so I've been working on it ever since. Spend a lot of time dealing with it. I appreciate you being here this morning. We have a great panel. We have Kyle Arnone from the AFT, the Research and Strategic Institute. Initiative. Okay. Amanda Blair, attorney from Phillips, in the middle there. Annie Picciano, sorry, from Hunter College and CUNY graduate of School of Education. And they're going to be our panelists today. And I know we're kind of busy, but we also have one other person who wants to welcome you here today.
Hello, everyone. It's Ronald Reagan. I'm honored to join today's panel, but things did not work out. But I want to thank Rob, Kyle, Amanda, and Anthony for asking me to welcome you to this important panel on navigating generative artificial intelligence, or AI, as we gather to explore and discuss this pivotal topic and its implications on pedagogy, research, and collective bargaining. I hope you will think about questions to ask the panelists after their presentations. I know the panel will be great. Like you, I look forward to insightful discussions, collaborative learning, and the opportunity to envision a future where technology and education converge to enrich and empower both educators and learners. Happy Monday, and enjoy the city that never sleeps.
So I cloned Ronald Reagan this morning before I came because I said, well, let's start the AI off with a little AI and making sure you understand it. And I wanted to be very clear. I used a program called 11 Labs to do this, and I only used 2 clips to get that voice. And you can, it sounded pretty good. You could tell the cadence was a little off, and some of the other stuff was off. But the more clips you put into it, the better and better it gets. And this this platform, program, what do you want to call it, will take up to 25 clips to improve it. So if I only put 2 and that's what I got, you can imagine what it would do, the quality of that, if I added 25 clips to that cloning of his voice. So I think that's where we're at a little bit today. We got a whole new world in front of us, and it's going to affect us a lot of different ways. And today's panel is called Navigating Generative AI in Higher Educations, the Implications for Pedagogy, Research, and Collective Bargaining. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But I also want this to be, we do have kind of a big crowd, but I want it to be interactive. And so I want you to think about what questions you're going to have. We're going to have some quick presentations from the speakers, but then we're going to go into interaction. We're going to talk to each other about this because it's important that we understand what's coming in front of us. I want to say a couple words and then I'll move on and Kyle will go first. Something to really remember about artificial intelligence is pretty simple to understand what it is. It is a bunch of tools to replace work and decision making. Full stop. That's what they're doing. They're developing tools to replace work and to replace human decision making. That's what AI is. And especially new generative AI, really about that. And as we move forward, we have to shape it. And one of the most important parts of shaping AI is not allowing decision making to go out of our hands. As we talk about this, I do a lot of presentations on AI around the country and a lot of different places. And one of the things I stress, especially to union audiences, is that the key is making sure you can shape it, you shape the decision-making processes in AI. That's the key. That is where you move forward. That's how you control it, that's how you shape it, by ensuring humans are still in the loop, still control the loop, probably a better way to say it, when it comes to decision making, because there is absolutely no doubt the decision making power of these tools are growing every day. And if I'll stop here, and last thing I'll say is it's moving exponentially fast. What was considered, something called general AI, where it replaces human intelligence, a few years ago they said that's 10 years off, 20 years off, 30 years off. Now general AI, they're thinking 3 to 5. It's moving so fast, nobody really understands it. And the last thing I'll say is, I say this every audience, if you're ever in front of somebody and they say they're an AI expert, you're looking at a liar. Because nobody knows where this is going. Nobody knows. Even the people developing it sometimes will tell you, I have no idea what it does. I don't know how it makes decisions. I don't know how it goes to where it goes. This is what we're dealing with. It's the classic Jurassic Park. The scientists were so preoccupied whether they could do it, they didn't ask whether they should do it. And that's the classic AI. And that's where we're at today. Hopefully we have a better outcome than what happened in Jurassic Park. But I just wanted to put a few opening thoughts in your head. It's not going away. Sobering thought, it's here to stay. And when we think about our students, especially, I talk to tons of K-12 teachers, this will be the world the students inherit. This is the world they have to be successful in. So we have to figure out a way to make them successful and still create and hold on to the humanity of our society and all the other things. And that's going to be more difficult than people think sometimes. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kyle from the AFT.
So I just want to introduce myself as the foremost expert. So I'm Kyle Arnone. I'm the Director of Collective Bargaining at the AFT. I support our affiliates usually in contentious negotiations, and we have been tracking pretty closely what's been happening with artificial intelligence. As Rob said, he's probably had his eyes on this longer than anybody at the AFT, but I've been taking an interest in it too. And when the writers and actors won on strike, we definitely paid attention. At first, it was kind of buried in the story. It was about, I think, residuals for streaming was kind of the top issue, and then some of the wage stuff. And then over time, as that strike went on, the AI part of the story got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. We had a chance actually to hear from the folks at WGA and SAG-AFTRA about a couple months ago about the process that they went through. So I'm going to bring some of those insights into this. I'm just getting started real quick. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think one of the interesting things about AI that's a little bit scary and new for us is that when we first started thinking about it, it was like, automation was a blue-collar problem. That's how we talked about it for a long time. It was self-driving vehicles, it was blue-collar jobs that were going to be at risk of automation. And what's changed, I think, since the release of ChatGPT is that people realize that the biggest risk is actually white-collar jobs. And it's because the physical world is very fussy. It's tough to get it right. It needs lots of repairs. But the intellectual world doesn't need that as much. And I think that's why it scared people. And one of the, this is just from a comic that's in MIT Technology Review, which is great. Professor Koken over there and I were talking about it earlier. But one of the big risks in AI is that it basically functions by stealing our data and repurposing it and either replacing us or selling it back to us. And so it was only natural in some ways that the first struggle over AI happened in the entertainment industry, because it feels like that was really the place. And if we met some of these people, but they've been going to this Consumer Electronics Show that's in Las Vegas every single year for the last, I don't know how many years, 30 years or so, 40 years. They've been attending that show for at least a couple decades because they were trying to stay on top of technological changes as a union so they can anticipate it in bargaining. So I think that they approach this very smartly. What I want to show you is it does not solve all the problems. they still have some major issues to deal with. And I give them a ton of credit for staying on top of the issues. But collective bargaining honestly can only go so far, but I'll revisit that point later. So I was curious, so I entered into ChatGPT. I just said, I could draft a resume for generative artificial intelligence. So the applicant itself is GAI. And I said, most resumes usually cherry pick the best features. Tell me what your promises and your perils are, the accomplishments and setbacks. And it does a pretty good job. You don't have to look at the detail over here, but it identified 4 big things. The first is that it struggles with maintaining context, and it produces a lot of bias and inappropriate content. And if you just read any news over the last couple of weeks, the Genesis stuff in particular with Google was very interesting. The second issue is it raised concerns over intellectual property rights and the originality of AI-generated content. That was really at the heart of the writers and actors strike. Third thing is that issues with data privacy and model interpretability, emphasizing the need for transparency. So I have 4 central questions that I want to go through. So the first is, what have collective bargaining agreements addressed, or how have they addressed generative artificial intelligence to date? So we're going to take a quick look at the SAG and WGA agreements. The second part is what existing contract provisions have relevance for higher education bargaining. And then the third is what unique considerations face higher ed. And then the fourth one is how should we approach AI in the bargaining process? So the mechanics of bargaining over it. So let's quickly touch on what they bargained. This is going to be tough to see, but I will walk you through it. And it's actually very small for me too. So the 2 agreements look very different. Got me now? WGA and SAG came to very different deals over AI. And this hasn't been reported as much. They recognize it too. Oh my goodness.
Over there.
Okay, so the WGA and SAG agreements looked very different at the end. WGA's, I'm going to use broad strokes, then I'll get into the details in a second. WGA's agreement, the writers, had much more of a prohibition on the use of AI to do their work. There's some nuance here. SAG's does not prohibit the use of GAI. What it does is it puts limitations around fair compensation and informed consent. So let's just go through some of the provisions. So for the writers, the producers can give the writers GAI generated material, but they have to clearly identify it, that it was generated by GAI. But it can't be considered literary material, and it can't be considered source material. If you look at their contracts, those 2 terms have a specific meaning. Literary material is tied to pay. So if you were provided with literary material, you get less pay. So it can't reduce your pay. And then source material would affect your credits. So they got rid of GAI taking their place in terms of credits. So that was a huge win for them. Writers may use GAI to produce material with consent of the company. So they have limits on their ability to use it as well. The reasoning is that there is some, and I'm not a lawyer, but there are some worry that the intellectual property rights, it's difficult to, there's rules about how you can copyright GAI generated content. And if it was produced by artificial intelligence, the companies don't think in some cases that they can exploit that material and then commercially sell it. So they want to make sure that if a writer's going to use it, that there was enough of a human impact on the final product that they can exploit that material for commercial purposes. This third one is one of the most interesting ones, and it is not in the SAG agreement as far as I can tell. They reserve the right to assert that the writer's written material was used to train GAI. So this is one of the trickiest parts about artificial intelligence systems, is that it's trained, and it's very hard to tell what material is put into those systems to train it with. And the writers have the right to protest or basically file grievances over if they're taking writers' content, training artificial intelligence systems on that content, and then producing original content of their own. But again, it's going to be very hard for them to track this stuff. And then there's a last piece here that they have a right to meet semi-annually to continually revisit all the implementation of AI. So the actors. I never thought I would see in the collective bargaining agreement that there's something called a synthetic performer. So there might be a synthetic instructor at some point in our collective bargaining agreements. I mean, that's completely a possibility. They make a distinction in their agreement between a synthetic performer and a digital replica. A synthetic performer is something that's created anew. It's not intended to have likeness to a natural performer, and a digital replica is the opposite of that. So you could have a digital replica of Tom Hanks or Denzel Washington, right? A synthetic performer is completely made up. So the production companies cannot use digital replicas. They can use digital replicas so long as the producer obtains clear and conspicuous consent. Those three words probably appear more than any other words in the section that deals with artificial intelligence, because they call these agreements like the minimum basic agreements. They don't actually call it a CBA, it's called an MBA. Because the way that the entertainment industry works is you have an MBA, a minimum basic agreement, and then the actors and writers enter into individual agreements with production companies and studios on their own terms. So you can do it. You can create a digital replica of Denzel Washington, but you got to get his permission to do so, and it has to meet the minimum payment standards. The next provision is the union obtains the right to notice and bargain in good faith when a producer intends to use a synthetic performer. So that's a performer that's going to replace a human actor.
They say it has to be in the stand.
Okay. Can I carry the stand? Okay, so the union has the right to bargain over when the production company intends to use a synthetic performer to replace them. This is very tricky language because the language basically says that if you use a synthetic performer, we have a right to bargain over it, but you would have to pay us for the time that a real human being would have performed that work. So it relies on a lot of good faith, and this again is not a critique of SAG and WGA. I think they did an incredible job with these agreements, but some of the stuff is just the limitations of bargaining over artificial intelligence that we have to be cognizant of. And then they have the same language about meeting semi-annually to discuss emergent issues. So I think this is important for us. Whatever language you are able to get to on artificial intelligence, it ain't done. If you got a 3-year agreement, you're going to have to write flexible language in there to revisit the issue, because as Rob was saying, this stuff develops exponentially. So I was reading the other day that in the past, the computational growth of AI would double every 2 years. Okay, it's down now to 3.4 months. Every 3.4 months, the computational growth doubles, and that number is probably going to shrink even further. So the language, I think, has to be flexible, and I have some ideas about that. So the first thing, so just point out some lessons here from the Hollywood settlements. The first thing is that the definitions matter. They struggled over how to define artificial intelligence in their agreement. It's tricky because they've been using versions of artificial intelligence in the entertainment industry for a long time. Was it generative artificial intelligence? That was really what the agreement tried to capture, was to draw a line between artificial intelligence as it had been used in the past and generative artificial intelligence. And I'll show you the definition in a second, but you need to make the definition good enough so that the employer, can't introduce new technologies that does the things we're trying to protect against. They say, oh, that's not GAI, that's something else. The clear and conspicuous consent, I think of work to hire agreements in higher ed, very similar in some ways. You all know what that is, right? Okay, I see a lot of head nodding. Very similar to that, so I think that's something we can use. The intellectual property right issues, that's a big deal for higher education. I think it goes well beyond research, and it goes into educational content. I'm going to share some thoughts on that in a little bit. Ongoing assessment, I already talked about that. And I think the other thing about this too is accelerated dispute resolution to me is an important piece of this, because if you have I have worked with many of our affiliates filing grievances. I don't have a lot of faith that grievances can be settled in a timely manner. And I think when there's issues you're talking about people's work being taken, and potentially repurposed, stolen, whatever you want to call it, and their jobs are at risk, that you can't rely on a grievance procedure process that might take 6 months, 9 months, a year to resolve. And then I would be thinking about expedited dispute resolution for all issues. You can keep it for the rest of the contract, but for issues relating to GAI, I would want something to resolve that issue faster, personally. We'll talk a little about this in a second. So if you wanted to see the definition of GAI in their contracts, this is actually verbatim in both contracts. So I think when WGA settled, they probably were talking to SAG, and SAG took the language, but it looks exactly the same. It's the only provision, except for one other one, where it's exactly the same. So what it says is that the term generally refers to a subset of artificial intelligence that learns patterns from data and produces content based on those patterns. That's a pretty good definition. But then it says at the bottom, and this is probably the most important part, is that the term GAI is used for convenience, and this section shall also apply to any technology that is consistent with the definition regardless of its name. Yeah. So I think that's good language that we should think about using in our agreements. Okay, so I want to talk about some of the issues with this agreement. Again, not a criticism of our brothers, sisters, siblings at WGA and SAG. So this stuff is difficult. They're going to be dealing with it on an ongoing basis. But they have enforcement issues. And I think this is going to be something that all of us are going to be dealing with. So just to give you an example from the actors agreement, it says if a digital double is made during a film, the studio must get your consent and provide a reasonably specific description of intended use, except when the photography or soundtrack remains substantially as scripted, performed, or recorded. They're going to have a ton of fights over what a reasonably specific description means. Because if I come to an agreement with you, I'm creating a digital double of you, so we're going to be using this for all things related to X. And you start packing a lot more things into X than I initially thought you were going to pack into X, you could then exploit that digital double for more than I initially thought. That's going to be difficult to enforce, and they have to enforce it on an actor-by-actor basis. So for the writers, nothing in this article restricts any writer who has retained reserved rights from asserting that the exploitation of their literary material to train, inform, or in any other way develop GAI software or systems is within such rights. So that's kind of a lot of legalese, but what that says is that they have a right to challenge if they believe that a writer's material was used to train a GAI system. How are you going to track that? They would know better than me because I don't know their systems well. We're going to have a similar problem in higher education. You have an online education platform. I would imagine that sometimes those platforms are contracted out to a third-party vendor. You upload your course content, your curriculum, any reading, all that stuff to that platform. And unless there's an agreement with the university that the vendor cannot use that information to train GAI systems, how do you know? And even if they did, how would you be able to know if they trained it or not? That's a very tricky one for all of us. The GAI training piece is critical because that's how the system works. It gets better based on the training, so it needs the training, but we also want to put some guardrails on what material is our intellectual property, and if they want to train it, someone's got to get paid for that. That's how work works. And then the last piece, and this actually scares me the most, especially for the actors, is the winner-take-all system. So here's what I mean. And I was hoping I would read this thing and I would see that they had some solution for this, and I don't know that there is one. There's nothing in the agreement that would stop a big-name actor, let's say Denzel Washington, because I love Denzel, from signing those informed consent agreements that say, yeah, you can create a digital double of me, and here's a reasonably specific description of, when you can use my digital double. And studios will use those digital doubles of Denzel Washington. He's a well-known name. Yeah. He can have 12 projects going on at the same time, and that means less work for younger, lesser-known actors. So it seems like, who knows what's going to happen, that there's this winner-take-all dynamic that GAI is going to accelerate. So there's already a little bit of winner-take-all, right? But it's going to accelerate, and there's nothing that can really stop it with the contract language. So we got a picture of Tyler Perry up here, and there's a reason for this. I was reading The Hollywood Reporter, because I like to follow the labor stuff in there, a couple weeks ago, and Tyler Perry had this planned expansion of his studio in Atlanta. He had an $800 million expansion planned. So that's a big expansion. He recently had a chance to see OpenAI's new software, which apparently Rob tells me is going to be available sooner rather than later, called Sora. It is text to video. It's crazy because I've been reading a little bit about Sora. Right after he saw it, he canceled that $800 million expansion of his studio and took a bunch of interviews and said people's jobs are going to be lost. If you can read his quote here, it's kind of crazy. He goes, I would no longer have to travel to locations. If I want to be in the snow in Colorado, it's text. If I want to write a seed on the moon, it's text. And AI can generate it like nothing. I don't have to build a set in the mountains. I don't have to put a set in my lot. I can sit in an office and do this with a computer, which is shocking to me. He, by the way, to give him credit, he said it from the perspective of this is terrible. But he was also a realist, and he runs a company, and it's like, why would I put $800 million in expanding my studios if we're not going to need studios in the same way that we have in the past? So I want to give you this conundrum. Does anyone listen to Political Gabfest in here? Man, am I the only one? I thought this was a popular podcast. That's what they always say. All right, so they did this thing called conundrums. I've given this to some of my staff and some interns I've had over the past couple of years, and it's always shocking to me what they choose. So it's kind of a would you rather situation. So you put yourself in the role of a student applying for college, and you get two options. Which would you choose? Remember, you're a younger person here, dealing with like lots of student debt. Job market opportunities haven't been as great as they've been for many of us in the past. So option number one, you submit your application to a GAI system that matches your profile with an ideal college. If you choose this option, you can only enroll in the matched college, but the cost of attendance is waived. And number two, you can choose any college of your choice with guaranteed admission, but you must pay full cost. Now, I've done this enough times to know now that you young people overwhelmingly choose option number one. It's shocking because I think I'm probably on the cusp where I would probably pick two if really push comes to shove. But people are terrified of student debt, and that's really the thing that I think higher education has to worry the most about. I think about where does competition come from? There's going to be some limits on what collective bargaining can do, and we got to be honest about those limits. Yes, there's going to be some colleges and universities that might be trying to be more efficient and cut jobs by using GAI. That's going to be part of it, understandably. But the bigger threat in my mind is actually from non-incumbents. So if you think about where the production studios had threats, cable companies where they had threats, it wasn't from another cable company. It was from Netflix, who came out of nowhere and said, we're streaming now. And so I worry about that with higher education, that when you have this high cost, and Rob has put this to me perfectly, K-12 doesn't have the same issue. K-12 doesn't have this issue, one, because public education in this country is free, thank God. And number two, one of the missions of K-12 is to socialize young children. Higher education, that's part of it, much smaller piece. And so I think it means that generative artificial intelligence is a bigger risk to higher education than it is to K-12, just being honest. So if I'm thinking about contract language around this, and we do have draft contract language around AI for all of our constituencies now, it is in draft form. Here are just some initial thoughts on pieces I would want to see in it. So the first thing is I think it needs to be part of shared governance, just right out of the gate. It doesn't have to be in the collective bargaining agreement. It can be through some other mechanism, whatever the case may be, that decisions about how AI will be used for pedagogical purposes, for any purpose, should be something that's subject to shared governance. The second thing is I think there needs to be robust professional development and training. Faculty, graduate workers need to know how to use generative artificial intelligence, both the strengths and the weaknesses. And in any other field, in healthcare, I do a lot of work in healthcare, there would be training about how to use a new technology that's coming out. There's new radiology software that's going to change radiology. The rad techs are getting training on it. And I think that I would think of generative artificial intelligence in the same way. And I think we all need to be humble about our approach to this, because we all, you all probably think that folks are great instructors. They are, but I think the education is going to change dramatically, the way that people consume information, and better to be on the cutting edge of that than lag behind. The last part is transparency and assessment. I think just like the writers and actors agreements, that there needs to be regular revisiting of the implementation of any GAI systems, transparency about the algorithms, and I will tack onto this, if you go over to the right, auditing rights. I'm imagining, I don't know if this is going to happen, but I think about health benefits, that one of the important things with health benefits in our agreements is that we have the right to audit the claims, because a lot of times we're not experts in the field. And I would want the same thing for generative artificial intelligence systems. I would want the right to bring in a third-party auditor to audit the system for bias and for compliance with whatever terms that we came up with as an institution. The IP protections I talked about already. The online education platforms are a huge risk. You could have in your agreement, if there was an agreement between the unions and the university, that it would if they use a third-party vendor, that it requires the university to specify in their agreement with a third-party vendor that they may not use the information submitted to the platform to train GAI systems. And then, the last thing is the expedited, dispute resolution, which I already talked about. I'll just say one more thing, because I know I'm out of time. You do not have to wait to bargain over GAI for your contracts to expire. You don't have to wait to that point. And I think it actually in some ways is not, will you agree with me or no?
It's not beneficial to wait.
Yeah, I think that we've done this with several other issues too. When an issue is important as something like this, and where there's mutual interest, I think there is mutual interest in trying to get it right, having it be part of the open book, full negotiations may not be the most productive place to have those negotiations, because you're going to get into the horse trading, right? You're going to get into, economics, job security, all this other stuff that's going to be entangled with negotiations. It's going to be contentious. It would be great if you can try to create a space outside of the opening the full contract where you can come to an agreement in an MOU, whatever it is, where you can talk just about this issue. The advantage is that it takes all the horse trading away, and you're trying to focus on one issue. And then the second advantage is that you're not waiting for the expiration. Because if your contract expires in 3 years, I will wait 3 years to talk about this. So I would encourage you to think about it sooner rather than later, and this is one way to deal with it. So I'll stop.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm an attorney at Fisher Phillips. I've been practicing there for the past 3 years. Prior to that, I was an attorney for the New York City Law Department. I do management side, labor and employment, so I have a different perspective here as we negotiate for union rights with respect to collective bargaining agreements. But I think we all can work together to find something that's going to work. I'm an attorney. I'm one of those positions that might be taken over by AI. I'm ready. I'm excited. I got into this area a little over a year ago when New York City was like, we want to be first and have bias audits, which is a great thing because we all know there's discrimination in AI. We all know that everyone discriminates and we need to address it face on. So I'm going to talk, I'm going to slow down. First, I'm going to go through New York City's,
Excuse me.
sorry, Amanda, Blair. First, I'm going to go through New York City's local, First, I'm going to go through New York City's Local Law 144 and its adopted rules. Basically, it was the first in the nation legislation addressing bias in AI and the requirement to have bias audits. Then I'm going to talk about proposed legislation that's been introduced in New York and also in other states. Then other actions that have been taken, specifically Biden's executive order, guidance that's been issued by a federal agency, the EEOC's take on AI and discrimination, and then the EU's AI Act, which was just adopted, but officially needs to be adopted by all EU members, but adopted by the EU just last week, which is going to be pivotal. We know the EU often takes steps to protect employee rights before the US does. And then finally, some takeaways, a lot of the things that Kyle mentioned, but then just, giving my own perspective on them as you negotiate contracts. Okay, so bear with me, because I'm going to get really legal, because that's what I do. Okay, so Local Law 144 is legislation stemming from 2021. However, it didn't go into effect until last summer because there was a lot of rulemaking, a lot of haggling, especially because it's New York City. Whatever happens in New York City, other states, other localities are sure to follow. A lot of people had some things they wanted to say about it. Basically, what it requires is an annual independent bias audit of automated employment decision tools used by an employer and employment agencies during hiring and promotion process to assess disparate impact based on race and ethnicity and sex. So we're just starting with race and ethnicity and sex. Eventually, knowing New York City, it's going to be expanded to other protected classes. But those are the categories that the audit has to be done for at this stage. Finally, you need to give notice to candidates that there is going to be used. This AETT is going to be used to evaluate them when they apply for a job or in their promotional opportunities. And then specifically New York City residents have to get their own notice letting them know that there is the use of this tool, and also they have the right to choose an alternative method. That alternative method doesn't actually have to exist. So I'm very interested to see how that works in application. Originally, the law, what happened was vendors would have the responsibility to conduct the bias audit. I kind of wish the law had stayed this way because it's a lot to understand. The learning curve here is so high. So I started doing this a year and a half ago. I am new, just like a lot of you probably are, being like, what the hell is going on? In my studies, Kyle mentioned higher ed and learning. I'm using edX and Coursera to learn about AI in my free time so that I can adapt and be able to work with my clients so that they understand the technology. It moves so fast. This came out, I think, AI officially in the 1950s. We're not even 100 years later, and they expect us to be like AI robots. So it's something that everyone's going to have to learn, and I'm right there along with you. So I'm going to walk through some of these terms so you understand. But essentially, the vendors no longer have the responsibility to conduct the audit. It falls on the employers and the employment agencies, which means HR. HR, you are out there. You are now have many hats since COVID. You now need to be an AI expert, as we all said, so you can understand what the technology is doing, who it's affecting, if it's causing bias, if it's being implemented correctly. It's a lot for someone to adopt and understand, but that is the responsibility that we now have in New York City. So as I said, it started to be enforced. It went into effect in January, but enforced in July by the city's agency, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, which was created during the de Blasio administration to protect workers. And so they're going to be responsible for making sure that these bias audits are being, conducted. I'll talk about actually what's happening there. So what does it require? I already talked over this. You need to do an annual bias audit. There's some conversation of whether it actually needed to be annual, but yes, every year this tool needs to be audited to make sure what impacts it's having. The law does not require anything change. So the tool you could find is biased. It is discriminating based on race. It is discriminating based on sex. That doesn't mean the tool has to stop being used under the New York City law. But unfortunately, because you have to publish your information, I'm an employee and I'm like, oh, well, this is discriminatory. Then what happens is there are other laws that protect workers. We have Title VII enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and then in federal courts. Employers are very remiss to publish that information because, as you've seen possibly with salary transparency, once employees know about this information, they're going to start asking questions. So in the actual There's been some studies showing that and if you've noticed on websites, you might not see a lot of bias audits, even though you should see many bias audits, because a lot of companies are using AI when they're evaluating their applicants. It's because there's this hesitance to publish this information, because then everyone knows, oh, there might be a problem with this tool. Okay, we talked about the summary. This is just summarizing employer responsibilities that I already went through. This publishing aspect, much to my frustration, many employers are no longer local to one state. They're now national, they're international. And so a lot of the questions have been, wait, we have to tell everybody that we're using, a robot, or we're using an algorithm to evaluate our candidates? Yes, that is a conversation that has to be had depending on where they're located, if they have offices in New York, et cetera. But that information that shows the broad impact of the law across the country when you're starting to publish this information and more people are gaining awareness about it. Okay, so I really wanted to talk about what the definition of an AATT, because this is where I think it gets, kind of scary and really hard when you're trying to navigate this area. So I'm just going to read this just for everyone to see. So an automated employment decision tool means any computational process derived from machine learning, statistical modeling, data analytics, or artificial intelligence that issues simplified output, including a score, classification, or recommendation, that is used to substantially assist or replace discretionary decision-making for making employment decisions that impact natural persons. That just sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. Breaking it down, it doesn't get any better. So a computational process derived from machine learning, statistical modeling, data analysis, and artificial intelligence. Okay, so step number one, if you're the HR rep, you need to talk to your vendor and say, okay, what are you using? Are you using ChatGPT to create this? Do we have our own internal process? Do you use your own kind of large language model to create this tool to do the processes here? I mean, what is the actual technology, the basis for the tool that we're using to scan resumes, to review interviews, to make determinations of, oh, this is in category 1 and these are in category 4 of who's going to get through the next process. Then a simplified input of a score, a classification, a recommendation, yes, higher, oh, they're ranked 5 out of 10, they're ranked a 9 out of 10, and then, what it means to, substantially assist the decision-making process. So in New York, and you might have seen recently, there's articles that this law is not as effective as it was intended, because substantially assist creates a huge loophole in terms of who actually needs to conduct a bias audit. If you have a human involved in the process of analyzing, okay, this person's going to be ranked 9 out of 10, and if I look over their resume and I agree with the algorithm and my opinion is 51% more important than the 49% of the algorithm's opinion, do I need to give it a bias audit? That's the nuance here that we're dealing with. And as I'll talk about in a second, where some laws, like the New York State law, is trying to address that loopholes that's been created. I have bored you enough over the technical, so I'm gonna skip that slide. Okay, so proposed New York legislation. So New York State and New York City are often, sometimes they're working in tandem, sometimes they're competing with each other. Here, New York City was first, but the law is not as effective as it was intended to be. And so in New York State, some legislatures have introduced legislation that would also require a bias audit of automated employment decision tools, but that word substantially assist is now just assist. So if you have that relationship of 51% is a human and 49% is the algorithm, we still need to have a bias audit. So that's hoping to address the issue of these loopholes where people are not actually evaluating their tools, which they should be doing anyway. So if you're, with respect to your industry, these tools should be audited, because you should want to know if you are discriminating against your employees, if you're discriminating against your students. This isn't something you should be afraid of. It's something that you should embrace so that you understand your tool. Not unfortunate, but the hard part of it is that it's a lot to understand and distill in a very short period of time. Another piece of legislation that's been introduced by the New York, by the Assembly for New York is a Robot Tax Act. So we all kind of know that, and as Kyle alluded to, our information, our knowledge, our hard work, our education, our experience in the workplace is now going to be absorbed by our employers, and that can then be distilled into, here's the model employee. They do everything. Other employees, base your work off that person, or other employees use your work off this person. We now can get our work done in 2 days versus 5 days. Oh, are we going to fire our staff, or do we, allow people to have 2-day work weeks? They're not going to allow us to have 2-day work weeks. So there's going to be a huge change with respect to earnings and what you can earn in your career if a lot of that is moving faster, more efficiently, and you don't need as much human involvement. So this legislation, which is unlikely to pass, but is a proposal that would create a tax to offset that harm, where you're using a robot to replace a human. You need to be taxed in certain industries so that we can compensate for the loss there to workers in terms of revenue in the industry. Okay, and then I just wanted to touch on a few other states that are introducing legislation that's touching on these areas. We have Illinois, has like a developee kind of process, similar bias audit of if you develop the tool or if you're using the tool. California, always in competition with New York, wants to also put their stamp on AI, and so they have several laws out there that would address the issue. One that touches on me is lawyers and actually citing correct cases and not made up cases from ChatGPT, which would be very helpful. I'm so stressed about judges putting out just individual rules because people are behaving badly. This is an area that's new for us as well. My firm uses what's something called co-counsel. So it's like a ChatGPT resource where you can ask it questions. Hey, what's New York's policy on, collective bargaining agreements for, veterinarians? And, it'll bring up different resources, case citations that you can use, and then it just helps speed the process along. I'm sure you've seen it with students, helps with drafting, all those fun technologies, but we also have to put the brakes on some of that as well. And then Connecticut has its own bill that they would have an AI council to kind of engage and inform people on AI as we're all learning and developing in this area. So then just a few other areas, because I think these are important these are not legislative frameworks because New York has passed laws, other states are working on laws, but these are more guidance, except for the EU's Act, that would help inform the collective bargaining process and things that you should think about in terms of working through these processes. So the first is EEOC and Title VII. So the EEOC basically came out and said, you can't discriminate, duh. I mean, there's not really, even though AI is new, even though AI is flashy and it's this whole new world for everyone, we have laws that address discrimination in the workplace. You need to follow those laws. It doesn't matter if you're using an algorithm or a robot. You cannot discriminate based on the protected classes protected under Title VII. And so they issued guidance to kind of help navigate what that means, selection rates that you have to follow. But at the first and foremost, the federal government's position is that we will enforce the laws that we have on the books that do apply in this area, and you should not be discriminating against your employees. Biden's executive order that he introduced in October 2023 has 8 guiding principles for and priorities. So workplaces of AI must not harm workers or unions. AI cannot result in discrimination in housing, healthcare, or hiring. Privacy and civil liberty interests must be protected. AI must safe and secure in testing and labeling systems. These principles to live by. There's not any enacting legislation associated with it, but when we're talking about AI, these are the things that you should be thinking about. The White House Office of Science and Technology policy also issued a blueprint, an AI Bill of Rights. You're going to probably see more of that with localities, possibly statewide. For example, New York City just issued an immigration Bill of Rights, and so New York City likes to do a Bill of Rights for employees, so they always have something to go back to and be like, okay, this is what I should be looking at. So you're always going to want to look at any Bill of Rights that might apply to make sure that those are included in any agreement. And then the Bill of Rights has 5 principles: safe and effective use, algorithmic discrimination protections, data privacy, notice and explanation, and human alternatives consideration and bulk. And then finally, EU's Artificial Intelligence Act. This needs to be improved by the member states, but it likely will be since it was officially adopted. Creates safeguards on general purpose artificial intelligence. limits the use of biometric identification systems by law enforcement. So it's another aspect that we're looking at here. We can use it, police can use it too. So it's just, to create some barriers there to make sure that your face is being scanned everywhere, that they're not using that in every day in your walk of life, that you can't get anywhere without, them being able to identify who you are. Bans on social scoring and AI use to manipulate or exploit user vulnerabilities. You might have heard some countries will score. You have a score. Each individual person has a score, and that is going to be the basis of where you can live, the kind of employment you can have, the loans you can take out. So protections against not being scored in your everyday life, and the right of consumers to lodge complaints and receive meaningful explanations. The EU Act will classify AI based on its risk. So less risky, it'll have less oversight. More risky, it's going to have more oversight. And I think that's also another aspect of negotiating and bargaining. Okay, what are the things we're really afraid of? Does that need to be written in our agreement, or or the little things, the minor things that are often going to adapt very quickly? They don't need to be written in the agreement, and you have a conversation about them at another stage. That a stage to be written in the agreement, you should always identify when, or it's not going to happen. I just have some key concepts here that I think you want to take into account when you're having your negotiations with respect to the collective bargaining agreements. Training and continuing education is the most important. You no longer can go to school, K through 12, or get a GED, go to college for 4 to 5 years, go to grad school. You are going to constantly learning. For some people, I know that sucks. It's not fun. After I finished law school, I was like, I'm done. I don't want to learn another thing. I'm over it. But then a few years later, I was signing up for a writing course because I missed being in a classroom. So, not everyone's going to feel as positively about education, but it's going to be a reality of the future. We have to continue to adapt. And so the conversation is, who's paying for it? Is it the employee paying for it so that they can continue to work in their job, or is it the employer paying for it so that they continue to have a workforce? And so I think that's an important conversation and should be outlined in a collective bargaining agreement of the training. What are the expectations and who's going to pay for it? How are you going to get compensated? Notification, use monitoring metrics. So first, notification, are you using these tools? Are you using automated employment decision tools with respect to my ability to get a promotion? You're going to have an algorithm rank whether, Susie comes before me because X, Y, and Z reasons that I have no idea why. So first and foremost, knowledge is power. You want to know that these tools are being used. Monitoring. The reality is that employers will be using these tools to watch what you are doing. They're going to be seeing how fast widgets are made, and they're going to be seeing, are you actually on your computer when you're working from home? They're going to be doing algorithms and metrics to see, okay, how fast could we get this done, and this person is not doing it as fast as that person, so they should be fired. New York likes to move ahead in that area. So with respect to legislation, they have the Warehouse Act, where you have certain employers are using their tools to see if you're moving fast enough in the warehouse environment, and then employees are not getting breaks that they're have the right to have. So it's already happening now. It's going to happen continuously. So monitoring in terms of limiting the ability to monitor, or at least the parameters of the ability to monitor, should be identified. And then metrics, same thing. How am I being evaluated? Is it going to be an algorithm that's evaluating, or is it actually going to be my supervisor? You want to know what all that information. I mean, supervisors are using ChatGPT to write their evaluations. Like, that's happening today. So, it doesn't mean it's not right or wrong. It's happening. And so you want to know, okay, did a human write this, or is it they put in a few keywords and then ChatGPT wrote my evaluation? Input. So the parameters for the use of technologies and prohibition. So prohibition is a hard one. Do we just blanketly ban it? Which I don't think you should do, because it's coming. Adapt, learn, grow, and then you can control it. If you just run away from it, you have no say in how it's being used. So I definitely think prohibitions are not the way to go. But you want to set parameters of how it's being used. Is it going to take over my job? Am I going to be obsolete in 3 to 5 years? Have that conversation as you're negotiating, and as Kyle said, set metrics of, okay, every 6 months we need to talk and evaluate where things are going. Is our terms in our CBA agreement, still effective? So working as we intended. Cooperation between management and union representatives, that's the hardest one probably, but it needs to happen. You need to have both sides in a room. You need to ensure that you're in a room. So again, New York, more pro-union and labor rights. If you remember, unfortunately, the COVID pandemic, they enacted the HERO Act to address the pandemic and airborne infectious disease because most employers had no idea what to do. Now you have to have a plan. There's not a plan. Please look at that because it is a law. A plan to address when there is an airborne infectious disease and what steps you need to take to make sure you're keeping your employees safe. A part of that is workplace safety committees, which means employees get to be part of a committee, be in the room, look at safety policies, be there when there are inspections. That's a conversation that most employees are not ever involved in or part of. And so that's a requirement under law. Hey, safety is important. Employees should be there and have a say so with respect to that. That's another conversation that we're having here. AI, you're going to have this tool that's going to make half of my skills obsolete. I want to know, okay, where do I go? What do I do next? What do you expect me to do next with respect to my job? Audits, I talked a lot about bias and discrimination. We all have biases. Like, we know that there are impermissible biases under the law, and we need to make sure that we are not perpetuating them through the systems that we are using. All the data, all the training data going into these tools is biased and based on historical discrimination, and we need to make sure we're combating that and that there are protections for employees as we move forward and use those tools. Evaluation of outcomes. Is it doing what they say it's going to do? There have been a lot of boom and bust cycles with AI. We might currently be in one. We have a lot of hope, a lot of fear about AI, but honestly, we could be, in, let's say, 1 year, we're no longer talking about this, we're on to the next thing. So you want to make sure that you're still evaluating that the tools are saying what they're going to say. In my field, I work with bias audits. You have a lot of employers thinking that they're using a tool. They're creating their own unique technology. They're basically just using ChatGPT. It's not, people think they know what they're doing, but they're not necessarily knowing what they're doing, which again goes back to the education. And then finally, job protection and restructuring, wages and benefits, wages, the Robot Tax Act. You want to protect your wages. We work so we can provide for our families, our friends, for ourselves. Make sure that you know what's going to happen to your job, what your outcomes are. Do I have 5 years? Do I have 20 years? Benefits. What benefits are you going to get, especially in the safety realm? Technology is not inherently good. Looking at a screen all day is still harming your health. You need to have protections with respect to that area. And finally, restructuring. Okay, I have to find a new job. I need to get new skills. That's fine, but are you going to help me navigate through that process? So that's my deal. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you for coming today. I have to say something that I'm somewhat different than the other panelists that are talking today. When Bill Herbert first approached me about doing this, and he talked about policy and collective bargaining, that is not my long suit. This is my 54th year in colleges, mostly at CUNY and SUNY. And I've had, the first half of my career was almost all administrative, where I was director of a computer facility. I noticed there was someone in the back who was at Lehman College. I built the first computer center there in 1969-70. And I've had all kinds of administrative positions, from director of computer facilities to dean to senior vice president at Hunter College, all on the administrative and student services side, not on the academic side. The last half of my career has been all academic. I've avoided administrative work like the plague. The reason for it was not, I enjoyed administrative work a great deal, but the reason I actually decided to get out of it, well, there was two reasons. One, my youngest got a scholarship, so I didn't have to save any money for college. That was very important. But the other was, I saw, and this is, I'm talking about the late 1980s, there was a centralization happening at CUNY. that I really didn't want to be any part of. At Hunter College, I worked for Donna Shalala. Some of you may know her. She was Secretary of Health and Human Services under Bill Clinton. She was the best president I ever worked for, senior vice president. She ruined my career because after working for her, I couldn't work for anyone else. But, and I hope there's no one here. Is anyone here from the central office? CUNY Central Office? Okay, well, I don't really care now because. But I'll mention what she used to say to me and the other senior VP. She said, make sure that CUNY Central does not stop us from being what we want to be. About Hunter College. And unfortunately, a lot of the really strong presidents of that period left. Retired. Donna went out to the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Others passed away. And I saw a centralization going on at CUNY, and I didn't really want to be part of it, to be quite honest with you. And so I decided to teach, and I've been doing that religiously since. That's a little bit of my background. If you want to know anything else about, there's a lot of water under the bridge. You can go to anthonypicciano.com. Anthony Picciano is one word. You'll see a lot of stuff there. And also I might refer to a couple of things I've written on this. But I've written about 20 books, mostly to do with technology in the last 30 years. And the most recent one I'll mention in a few minutes. In any case, I'm a little bit different from my colleagues. There's wonderful experience here in terms of policy, and especially issues related to AI, and now we're talking about plagiarism and copyright and what have you. These are all very important issues. That's not my expertise. I don't know it. I come from a teaching background and an administrative background, and that's going to be the essence of what I'm going to speak about today. Okay. So predicting what will happen in the future, a couple of my colleagues just mentioned about the future. Predicting what's going to happen in the future is very easy, especially if you might not be here to have to stand up to it. But it's the when that is the difficult part. And about 10, 12 years ago, I started talking about artificial intelligence. And I was giving a talk at, actually it was here in the city, and I think it was at John Jay College. And afterwards, a faculty member came up to me and said, Tony, do you think I'll have a job in 10 years? And I said, absolutely, you will have a job, without any doubt. But you won't be teaching the way you're teaching now. And I stand by that. I don't know how many of you are teachers here, but how you're teaching now is not the way you were teaching 10, 12, 15 years ago. Some of you probably were not using the web. You were not using online learning. And the latest kind of data we have is that we're approaching almost 45% of the faculty are teaching one course fully online in any given year. And almost 90% of the faculty are teaching some kind of blended environment, where part of their course has online components. That's in the last 10, 15 years. The question is, what's going to happen in the next 10, 15 years? And when I gave my talk a few years ago, 10 so years ago, and this assistant professor had come up to me, I was clear about what was going to happen, I think, in terms of AI and other kinds of things related to adaptive learning and data analytics, which has really been introduced in our colleges and universities for a while now, which most of those programs have AI components, by the way. But I was completely wrong about the when. It wasn't going to happen in the late 2020s or 2030s. It's happening now. It's happening right now as we talk, and a couple of the speakers before have illustrated the issues that are evolving. The one thing I want, and sometimes I talk fast, you should know that this is not a British accent I have. This comes from being born and raised in the South Bronx, which I'm very proud of, but it's not a British accent in case you misunderstood it. Several points to consider, and I'm going to try to move quickly because I think we should have a period for questions and answers, right?
Yep, that's right.
So let me just say, if I don't get to everything, let me just give you a quick outline on a few points. First, generative AI is only the beginning. A couple of my colleagues already mentioned general AI. We're not fully there yet, but it is coming. There are elements of it that already exist in much of what we do in our colleges and universities, to say nothing about the private industry. What's really important, we've talked about AI, but what's really important is how it integrates with other technologies. Okay. How it integrates with cloud computing, where all of our data is now someplace else. And if an institution like CUNY, with, I guess, I don't know, almost 400,000 or 500,000 students, all programs, 26, 27 campuses, they moved all of their mission vital applications onto a cloud. And I think, well, I don't know if it was Amanda who talked about, maybe, I'm not sure. In terms of what's out there, we have no idea. Most of us are using a course management system or a learning management system. We're in Blackboard, I guess our CUNY's in a state of flux. You have no idea what the people who control the cloud are doing with your data on you as you design your program, as you design your courses, and the students as they hand in assignments and what have you. No one knows. We don't know. And that's an important issue. Also, in terms of less important for the higher ed sector, but very important for, let's say, the manufacturing sector, how it integrates with robotics, right? Manufacturing now is a robotic-based industry for the most part. And it's only going to get more significant. And the last place I want to talk about is, or I'll mention, as you keep this in mind, is a kind of biosensing. What is it going to do? How it's going to influence things like health. I mean, Elon Musk just has got approval to develop basically a memory insert in someone's brain. And that's like, well, that's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's there. People are doing these things. Now, Elon Musk, I don't mean to, he's not my favorite person. But electric cars, space program, he's made a lot of significant contributions that 10, 15 years ago were, oh, he's not going to do this. And they're here. And also, I know none of you have had to go for any kind of surgery in the last couple of years, but I had reconstructive ankle surgery a couple of years ago. Half of it was performed by a robot. Half of it was performed by a robot, not by my surgeon, who I have tremendous faith in. So how AI integrates with these other technologies is quite significant. And the last comment I would make, and just take something away from what my colleagues have said, is that attempts to regulate it, I am not optimistic. I am not optimistic, to be quite honest with you. I hope I'm wrong. But the industries that are developing AI, their resources far outstrip the resources of most of the countries in this world. Some of those countries, such as the People's Republic of China, they're not going to be tied to something that someone decides in New York State, or in the United States, or in London, or this recently agreed upon policy that was just passed in Lisbon, I think, and with uses of AI. It's going to be incredibly difficult to control any of that. Let me go on to a little vignette. Any of you science people from biology or chemistry? There's a competition that's held every year. It's called CASP, C-A-S-P, Critical Assessment of Structure Prediction. It attempts to predict various protein structures and models in amino acids. It's been an area that's been studied for decades. There's a competition every other year. All the major scientists working on this from around the world meet and they provide their solutions for the models. It has never been resolved. No one has ever solved all of the models. And the award is given to the contribution that has that contributes the most to it, maybe solves 30% of the problem, 25% of the problem, 40% of the problem. Well, in 2018, the award was not won by a world-class scientist. It was won by an AI program developed by DeepMind. Have any of you heard of that story? It's been fairly well, among the science people, it's fairly well known. The award was given to an AI program, not to an individual group of researchers, some of whom are the best from around the world. One researcher, a fellow by the name of Mohammed Al-Qurashi, who was a biologist at Harvard Medical School, he has spent his whole career looking at problems related to protein structures. And he submitted to this particular contribution every other year. After DeepMind won in 2018, he said, I felt a melancholy. I was surprised and deflated. They were way out in front of everyone else. The smartest and most ambitious researchers wanting to work on protein structure will now look to DeepMind for opportunities. Just as a postscript to this, in 2020, DeepMind won the CAS competition again, and they solved 90% of the modeling issues. But Dr. Al-Qurashi, what he's saying is that I'm going to be the assistant to an AI program. I am not going to be the leader in the AI program. It's the software that's going to be the leader. There's an important lesson there, not just for research, not just for this problem, but for everything all of you are doing. Whether you're a teacher, you're an administrator, you're a counselor, you're an advisor, you work in the business office, you work in the financial aid office. Everything you're doing, we will evolve where you will be working really at the quote-unquote direction, don't make that a hard direction, but at the direction of an AI. I have no doubt about it. And to just look at the model, which I've been playing with for a number of years, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, in terms of AI is powerful, without a doubt. But its real power comes as it integrates with everything else. And I'm not going to get too much into the weeds of the nanotechnology and quantum computing, but there have been enormous strides in those areas over the last 10, 15 years. Quantum computing is operating at the electron level. Nanocomputing, or nanotechnology, which is across everyone, which most of us use in our computers, it operates at the atom level, maybe 10, 15, 16 atoms to store a bit. Quantum computing is working at the electron level. And it's not simply an on-off bit, which is what most of us have learned somewhere along the line, right? It's on, the electricity's flowing, if it's off, the electricity's not flowing, but it has two states. Quantum computing has multiple states. Not two, it has multiple states that it can work with. Are we there yet? Not quite. A couple of companies do have model quantum computing, quantum computers, but most are still working on it. And I have to say that AI has probably distracted from some of that development. Because if you look at the amount of money that Microsoft, IBM, Amazon, DeepMind are investing in development, a lot of it is going into AI. And they pull back from some of the hardware development, with the exception of IBM. So, this model, I've written about it, and I think you haven't seen the notes, but again, if you go to my website, you can find a couple of articles. The last 15, 20 years, I try and only publish in open resource journals. I try and avoid where you have to pay for things, although I do publish books. I sometimes talk to my publisher about doing a freebie, but he's not interested. And anyhow, I started earlier, and I mentioned that an important thing to realize is that we take quantum leaps in the last 10 or so years in terms of moving towards technology and now AI. But the big leap was really with the online, how we all moved to online. And we can thank, I think, to some degree, I don't have a good finger here. Okay, or to this. Anyhow, we can thank COVID for part of that. We went into COVID in 2020, probably no more than approximately a third of the faculty were teaching fully online courses at that time, in 2019. A lot of people were doing blended, but we don't have any good data on that. But once COVID came, everybody switched to remote teaching and learning. That meant everyone switched to online technology somehow or another. And I bet those of you who are teachers probably did that. And then we have what just happened in 2022, 2023 is generative AI. And my colleagues have mentioned a lot about that and talked about how that evolved. What was very important, which I don't think I heard, why it has had such an incredible impact, not just on what we're doing, but on our psyches, is this is the first AI that is popularly available. Anybody can access it. That wasn't true before. You had to go someplace specifically and work with a program, or it was integrated with some of the things you do. Now it's available on the web. Just as you can access your email, or you go to TikTok, or you go to Instagram, whatever social media platform you use, you can use generative AI. And the power of it keeps getting stronger and stronger. Incredibly stronger and stronger. Let me move through this a little more quickly. Oops.
Yeah.
You gotta give me help. I want to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
That's fine. No, that's, no. Why don't you stay there? So I've already talked about this, and I don't think we need to go into it any further. But where the real power of generative AI, as it advances into general AI, we are not there yet with general AI, but it is coming. And I think that's a good 6, 7, 8 years away, give or take 5 years. But all of these are advancing now. And, you know, so here is just to be a little bit of impressive. We basically talk now in terms of our computer power, in terms of gigabytes and terabytes. In another half dozen years, we'll be talking about zettabytes and yottabytes. And you can look at it, it's 10 to the 21 and 10 to the 24. There's so many zeros after that, that it's like this. And we'll see these other areas, particularly I think, what I think is going to be interesting, less involved with higher ed, but kind of neuroprosthesis. There's a lot of work that's going into that. Again, you've heard Elon Musk and what have you, but there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be involved with people, medicine and what have you, where they're going to be using various types of AI technology. We're all going to be wearing something that will monitor various things. We have simple, it will monitor your blood pressure and your heartbeat and whatever. That's going to expand tremendously. You are now also at the point where most of you know you can put in a kind of mechanism to control your heart, right? And to control its beats, right? That's been around for a long time. Well, we're now evolving where you can put it in your brain and to help people who have various types of neural problems. Hello.
You gotta use an arrow here.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so here are some concerns. How am I doing for time here? Oh, Jesus. Sorry. But in terms of some immediate concerns, students, will issues related to demographics, diversity, retention persist? We tried a lot to do things in this area. We do not succeed very well. We might, I don't know, but I do think that there's still going to be issues of access to technology, and at least for the immediate future, if you're talking about AI, it's going to be people with means who are going to have more access than people without means. For those who teach in places like City University of New York, where there's a huge population of students who do not have access to really good technology, we're aware of that now. That's going to persist. Finances. Will there be a contraction of the number of post-secondary institutions? We're already in that. I think in the last 10 years, something like 800 colleges and universities have closed, or merged, or otherwise consolidated. A lot of them were in the for-profits who got caught with their hands in the cookie jar in 2010. But a lot are not. Colleges that are stressed financially, and I'll give you the example, right here, north of here in Connecticut. And Connecticut is not a red state. Sorry if I offend anyone. It's not a red state, it is a blue state. Well, about 3 years ago, maybe more, they decided to consolidate their 13 community colleges into one system. That was just finalized this past July. The bulk of the administration, now those campuses still exist, but most of the administration is done centrally. And as new presidents are hired, they're not being given the title of presidents, they're given the title of Chief Executive Officer. Not president, Chief Executive Officer. And if you think that's really crazy, there is language about policy going through CUNY right this moment about talking about, when they talk about the president, the responsibilities of the Chief Executive Officer. That's going on now. And if you don't, not aware of it, talk to your PSC people and see what's going on with that particular area. Other areas which, and I think I want to move, I think there's been good comments made about, and what I said about Connecticut, the same thing has gone on in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, where there have been real significant reductions, if not mergers of colleges and universities, and that's financially stressed institutions and states. We know that the demographics are not with higher education, that they're expecting an enrollment drop. Nationally, in some states it will be more pronounced than others, but the Northeast is among the states that are going to be hurt more so than others. I'm going to try and end here, but I want to leave with a couple of quotes. There you go. Joseph Un, do any of you know him? He's the president of that Northeastern, very, I would say very fairly right of center person. And again, I have two quotes here, which are not now, but these are things that went on about 10 or so years ago. Here's Joseph Un, president of Northeastern and author of a book, Robot Proof, Higher Education in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. I suggest you look at it. In looking at the future of higher education, Un acknowledged American colleges and universities as among the fullest expressions of human culture ever evolved, and perhaps the most effective institutions for intellectual advancement ever developed. I agree with that. I bet most of you would agree with that. However, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say anything, I apologize. However, he went on to caution that if they fail to respond creatively and deliberately to the technological challenge that they face, they will wither into irrelevance. This is a president of a major college in the United States saying this. On the other end, we have Drew Faust, who was the president at Harvard. She just retired a couple of years ago. Has a wonderful book about her, a biography about her. In a message to the World Economic Forum, described three major forces that will shape the future of higher education. The influence of technology was number one. The changing shape of knowledge, that was number two. What she was really talking about that there is the whole idea of so many of the most important issues that we need to look at are interdisciplinary. We're in our silos when the sociologists don't talk to the psychologists, don't talk to the political scientists, etc. And then the attempt to define the value of education. We're in that right now when we came out of COVID, right? A lot of students are deciding, I'm not going to college. The value isn't there. I'm not going to spend $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year because I'm not going to get a job to pay off that loan for, that's going to take me 10, 15, 20 years to do. But she said, so much of what humanity has achieved has been sparked and sustained by the research and teaching that take place every day at colleges and universities. Sites of curiosity and creativity that nurture some of the finest aspirations of individuals and in turn improve their lives and their livelihoods. As the landscape continues to change, there's lots of talk there about technology, we must be careful to protect the ideals at the heart of higher education. Ideals that serve us all well as we work together to improve the world. I hope that's the direction we take, and not necessarily the direction that Alan was foreseeing. And if you want to see any more, I have 2 articles, all of which, the book is not, 2 articles in the book, which just was published a few months ago, looking at research and data analytics and adaptive learning. But the articles are free and they're free download. One of them actually is for the journal that is the houses who work for this consortium that Bill heads. Anyhow, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, there was a lot to talk about, and unfortunately, it is 12:15, which is our go time. But we're going to stay around if anybody has questions they'd like to ask the panel. But I know but I want to respect people's time. That's important. I always do that. And so, thank you very much. I thank our panelists for a great presentation.